On March 8, 1849, the Oakwood County Courthouse in Alabama burned to the ground. Officials called it an accident, a lamp knocked over by careless hands, but investigators found something that didn't match the story. 3 bodies in the basement, chained to iron rings embedded in stone walls. The county records from 1847 to 1847 to 1849 were completely destroyed. Property deeds, marriage licenses, birth certificates, all gone. Most importantly, the probate documents for the Harrison estate vanished in the flames. For over a century, descendants whispered about what really happened at Willow Creek Plantation during those 2 years. They spoke of twin daughters born to Colonel Richard Harrison, of the enslaved man named Joseph, who somehow documented everything before he disappeared, and of secrets so devastating they consumed an entire community's recorded history. This is the story of the Harrison twins, pieced together from surviving letters, medical records from Mobile, and testimony given to a Northern Abolitionist society that remained sealed until 1968. Before we discuss what happened at Willow Creek Plantation, you need to understand the world that created it. Oakwood County in 1847 sat at the heart of Alabama's cotton empire. The land was rich, black soil that made fortunes and built kingdoms of white mansions surrounded by fields stretching to the horizon. The county seat, Millerville, consisted of brick buildings and dirt streets where planters conducted business while their wives pretended not to know where the wealth came from. Willow Creek Plantation lay 9 miles south of town, accessible only by a private road winding through oak groves and across creeks. Colonel Richard Harrison built the main house in 1829, a 2-story structure with 8 rooms and a separate kitchen connected by a covered walkway. The slave quarters, 18 cabins in 2 rows, sat a quarter mile behind the house, close enough to summon quickly, far enough that the colonel didn't have to hear the sounds of the lives he owned. Colonel Harrison made his fortune in cotton, but his obsession was something else entirely. He'd studied medicine briefly in Charleston and brought back beliefs about human breeding and racial hierarchies. His library contained medical texts, agricultural journals, and correspondence with men at universities who shared his convictions about biological destiny. He kept meticulous records, measurements, observations, genealogies traced back generations. His neighbors called him brilliant but eccentric. The people he enslaved called him something that couldn't be spoken aloud. The colonel never married. Instead, in 1825, he purchased an enslaved woman named Rebecca from a Virginia trader. The bill of sale described her as of uncommonly light complexion and refined bearing. Rebecca gave birth to twin daughters in 1826, Elizabeth and Catherine. The colonel raised them in the main house, educated them with tutors from Mobile, dressed them in fine clothes from New Orleans. But he never freed them. He never acknowledged them legally as his daughters. On paper, they remained his property, an arrangement giving him absolute control over every aspect of their lives. Elizabeth and Catherine grew up in strange isolation. They learned to read, write, paint, and play piano. They studied literature, mathematics, and French. But they rarely left the plantation grounds. The colonel controlled every visitor, screened every social contact. He told them they were special, elevated above their station, but that the world would never understand or accept them. He taught them that safety came from seclusion, that trust was weakness, and that power, however limited, was the only currency that mattered. The twins learned these lessons too well. They developed their own language of glances and gestures, finishing each other's sentences, sometimes falling silent for days, and communicating only through notes. They wore matching dresses in coordinating colors, Elizabeth in deep burgundy, Catherine in midnight green. They shared everything: books, jewelry, secrets, and eventually something darker. Their mother, Rebecca, died in 1841, officially from fever, though the quarters whispered about bruises and fear in her final weeks. After her death, the colonel's control tightened. He installed locks on their doors that opened only from outside. He required weekly written reports on their activities, thoughts, dreams. He tested them constantly, leaving valuables to see if they'd steal, introducing male visitors to observe reactions, creating situations designed to reveal hidden rebellions. The plantation prospered through these years. By 1847, the colonel owned 51 enslaved people, producing 118 bales of cotton annually. But the enslaved population had an unusual profile. Disproportionate numbers of light-skinned individuals, more children than birth rates should produce, and a disturbing pattern of families separated just as children reached adolescence. The overseer, a man named Samuel Pritchard, had worked at Willow Creek for 12 years, carrying out the colonel's breeding program with mechanical precision. Elizabeth and Catherine understood more than their father realized. They read his journals when he traveled. They listened at doors. They knew what happened in the quarters after dark, knew which enslaved people were their half-siblings, knew their father viewed humans as experimental subjects, and they learned to hate him with cold, patient fury that would have terrified him if he'd recognized it. The morning of February 15th, 1847, arrived with unseasonable warmth. Colonel Harrison had spent the previous evening working late on correspondence. The household staff found nothing unusual when he failed to appear for breakfast. He often worked through the night. It was Pritchard who found him at 11 a.m., slumped in his leather chair, papers scattered across his desk. The colonel's face had a grayish tinge. He was dead. Dr. Marcus Grayfield arrived from Millerville 2 hours later and pronounced Colonel Richard Harrison dead, estimating time of death between midnight and dawn. Heart seizure, Dr. Grayfield declared. The man was 58, worked himself to exhaustion. I'd warned him about his temperament, but several details didn't align. The colonel's dinner brought to the study at 9 p.m. sat barely touched. A cup of coffee showed peculiar residue at the bottom. His final letter, addressed to his attorney, remained unfinished mid-sentence. I had arrangements regarding my daughter's futures which must be executed precisely for their protection and preservation of my life's work. Should anyone attempt to, the sentence ended there. Elizabeth and Catherine stood in the hallway wearing matching black dresses they'd somehow procured despite having no prior knowledge of his death. Their faces showed no tears, no shock. They held hands and watched the proceedings with identical expressions of watchful calm. Within hours, they'd taken control, announcing funeral arrangements and making it clear they intended to manage the plantation until the will was read. The funeral occurred on February 18th under gray skies. 37 neighbors attended, gathering in the parlor where the colonel's body lay in a walnut casket. Reverend Thomas Hayes delivered a eulogy praising the colonel's agricultural contributions. Not one enslaved person from Willow Creek attended, though they held their own ceremony in the quarters that evening, singing songs about liberation and settling of accounts. The attorney, Jonathan Osgood from Mobile, arrived the evening after the funeral carrying a leather satchel with the will and sealed documents. The reading took place in the colonel's study, thoroughly cleaned of any evidence of his death. Elizabeth and Catherine sat together on a settee. Pritchard stood by the door, uninvited but tolerated. Osgood opened the will and read the opening paragraphs, charitable bequests, personal items distributed. Then he reached the section concerning the plantation. To my daughters Elizabeth and Catherine Harrison, I leave the entirety of Willow Creek Plantation, including all lands, structures, livestock, equipment, and human property, to be held jointly. However, this bequest is conditional upon stipulations which must be satisfied within 18 months of my death. Osgood paused, cleared his throat. First, both daughters must enter lawful Christian marriage with men of suitable character approved by the executors. Second, both marriages must produce legitimate offspring within the stipulated time frame. Third, The daughters must maintain the plantation at current productivity levels. Should these conditions not be met, Willow Creek Plantation shall be sold at auction, with proceeds distributed to agricultural colleges and scientific institutions. Elizabeth's hand tightened on Catherine's. There was more, a private letter explaining the Colonel's reasoning with chilling clarity. He'd observed their unnatural attachment, their rejection of normal feminine interests in courtship. He'd concluded they'd never voluntarily separate, never form appropriate alliances with men who could continue his work. So he'd created a situation where they had no choice: marry and procreate, or lose everything. But the letter's final paragraph was most disturbing. I have arranged surveillance through my network of correspondents. They will monitor your conduct. Remember always that you are what I made you, and you cannot escape your fundamental nature, no matter how you pretend otherwise. The blood in your veins is both privilege and prison. Elizabeth folded the letter carefully. When she looked at Osgood, her expression revealed nothing. We understand the terms. Who serves as executor? I do, Osgood replied, along with Mr. Harold Brentwood as co-executor. 18 months, Catherine said. That gives us until August 1848. Correct. After Osgood left, the twins remained in the study. They sat in their father's chair, Catherine on the seat, Elizabeth perched on the armrest looking at walls lined with journals documenting decades of human experimentation. We can't find suitable husbands in 18 months, Catherine said. He knew that. He designed this to fail. Not if we control every variable, Elizabeth replied. Father taught us humans could be bred like livestock, that reproduction could be managed. We'll prove him right, just not how he intended. What are you suggesting? Elizabeth stood and moved to their father's desk, pulling open the bottom drawer containing his most private records. She withdrew a leather journal and opened to a marked page. Father's breeding logs. Everything documented: which combinations produced which results, which individuals he designated for his program. Catherine joined her, reading over her shoulder. The entries were clinical, dehumanizing. He was a monster, Catherine whispered. He was, Elizabeth agreed. But he was thorough. And somewhere in these records is our solution. Over following weeks, they absorbed themselves in their father's documentation. They discovered the full scope of his obsessions: 20 years of journals, detailed genealogies, physical measurements, observations on temperament. But within that documentation, they found something unexpected. Evidence of intelligence, resilience, and resistance among the people their father tried to reduce to data points. One name appeared repeatedly, with annotations of frustration: Rebecca, their mother. The colonel had expected compliance, but found a woman who resisted subtly but persistently, teaching her daughters to read secretly, whispering about life before slavery, planting seeds of doubt about his authority. She tried to protect us, Catherine said. Then we owe her more than survival, Elizabeth replied. We owe her victory. But victory required resources, time, and one more element. A man they could control completely, whose presence would satisfy the letter of their father's will, while violating its spirit entirely. The solution arrived in late April. The spring auction in Millerville drew sellers and buyers from across central Alabama. Elizabeth and Catherine attended with Pritchard, ostensibly to purchase field hands. They wore black veils, still in mourning, providing anonymity. The morning sales proceeded predictably until shortly before noon, when something unusual appeared on the auction block. Next lot, the auctioneer called, property of the deceased Montgomery estate. One male, age approximately 26, name of Joseph. As his letters can figure, worked as house servant and bookkeeper. No history of rebellion. Starting bid, $9,100. Joseph stood on the platform with straight posture and level gaze, neither defiant nor submissive. He wore clean but worn clothing. His hands showed no field calluses, hands that worked with ledgers rather than cotton. His skin suggested mixed ancestry. But what caught Elizabeth's attention was something else. The way he scanned the crowd, not with defeated resignation but with calculation, as if evaluating potential buyers. "Educated slaves are a risk," someone called. "Gets ideas. Perfect for bookkeeping," the auctioneer countered. "How many can balance your accounts?" The bidding opened slowly. Most planters didn't want educated male slaves, too much potential for trouble. But Elizabeth had Pritchard bid. The bidding climbed to $1,400 before competitors dropped out. Elizabeth had paid more than market value, fueling gossip. Joseph was delivered to Willow Creek 3 days later. Pritchard led him to the main house, where Elizabeth and Catherine waited in the study. "You can read and write," Elizabeth said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am." Joseph's voice was educated, careful, revealing nothing. "You tutored the Montgomery children. What did you teach?" "Reading, writing, arithmetic, geography, history, whatever was requested." Catherine circled him slowly. The Montgomerys were known Quakers. They educated their slaves. For the first time, something flickered in Joseph's eyes, wariness, or recognition that this conversation was complicated. "Mr. Montgomery believed all people possessed souls worthy of development, ma'am." "And you?" Elizabeth asked. "What do you believe?" "I believe I'm standing before two women who paid too much for me, and clearly have something specific in mind beyond field labor." The twins exchanged glances. Their father had taught them to view enslaved people as objects incapable of analysis. Joseph had demonstrated both within seconds. "We have an unusual situation," Elizabeth said carefully. "Our father died recently, leaving conditions on our inheritance that require creative solutions. We need someone educated, discreet, capable of understanding complex arrangements." "What kind of arrangements?" "The kind that must remain private within this household," Catherine replied. "You'll live in the main house, have access to our father's library, be treated well. But in exchange, you'll do exactly what we say when we say it." Without question. Joseph was silent for a long moment. "And if I refuse these unnamed terms?" "Then you'll be sold south," Elizabeth said flatly. "To cotton plantations in Mississippi where educated slaves are worked to death. I can have you on a boat within a week." "What do you want from me?" "That depends," Catherine said. "Can you keep secrets?" "Can you keep secrets?" "Even ones that could be used as weapons?" "I've kept secrets my entire life, ma'am. Had to survive." Elizabeth walked to the window. "Our fathers will require us to marry within 18 months, or lose everything. But we have no intention of submitting to marriages arranged by men who view us as property. So we're going to subvert the terms while technically fulfilling them." "I don't understand." "You will," Catherine said. "But first, we need to know if you can be trusted completely." Over following days they tested Joseph in ways both subtle and overt. They gave him library access and watched what he read. They asked his opinions on political matters, listened for hints of abolitionist sympathies. They observed how he interacted with other enslaved people at Willow Creek. Joseph proved remarkably adaptable. He kept to himself, spoke carefully, demonstrated intelligence honed through years of navigating dangerous social terrain. What the twins didn't know was that Joseph had his own secrets. The Montgomerys had been part of a network collecting testimony from enslaved people about plantation realities. Joseph had spent 5 years documenting atrocities in coded shorthand. When the Montgomerys died of fever, relatives sold the estate before anyone could discover the trunk in the root cellar containing years of evidence. Joseph had retrieved his most important notebooks, hiding them in a hollowed Bible no white person bothered to inspect. By mid-May, the arrangement had clarified. Joseph would serve as their private secretary, managing household accounts. But more than that, he would be their confidant in a scheme they hadn't yet fully explained. Elizabeth revealed their plan one evening in early June after the house slaves had retired. "Our fathers will require us to marry and bear children within 18 months, she began. "The executors must approve our husbands men of suitable character and standing. But the will says nothing about the husbands being suitable for us." "I'm not following," Joseph said. Catherine smiled, and there was something almost feral in it. "We're going to marry men we can control completely. Elderly men, or sickly ones, or men desperate enough for connection to a wealthy plantation that they'll agree to any terms. Men who'll give us legal legitimacy without interference." "And the children?" Joseph asked, though he was beginning to understand. "Biology is biology," Elizabeth said bluntly. "Our fathers spent 20 years proving lineage can be strategically managed. The executors need to see marriages and pregnancies. They don't need to see what happens behind closed doors." The full implications hit Joseph like cold water. They wanted him to father their children, creating the appearance of legitimate heirs, while the twins maintained control through marriages existing only on paper. "You're asking me to commit an act that could get all of us killed," he said slowly. "If anyone discovered, no one will discover," Catherine interrupted. "We control this household completely. The marriages will be arranged carefully. We'll manage every detail, every witness, every piece of evidence. You'll be protected." "Protected? I'm a slave. There's no protection for me. If this fails, you'll be ruined socially. I'll be hanged or burned alive, which is why you'll be motivated to ensure it doesn't fail," Elizabeth said. "And in exchange, you'll receive something worth the risk." "What could possibly be worth freedom?" Catherine said quietly. "Documented legal freedom and enough money to go north. We'll wait until after the children are born and the estate is secure. Then we'll manumit you, provide funds, send you away with a cover story that holds scrutiny." Joseph looked between them, searching for deception. "And if I refuse, you won't," Elizabeth said with certainty. "Because you want freedom more than you fear death. And you're smart enough to recognize this as your only real chance." She was right, and he knew it. But there was something else at play. Joseph saw in their scheme not just personal freedom, but an opportunity to document and expose the entire system. If he could gather evidence about the Harrison family's secrets, about the Colonel's experiments, about the network of planters who'd collaborated in decades of atrocities, he could send that information north. "I'll do it," he said finally, "on one condition." "You're not in a position to make conditions," Catherine said. "I am. If you want my cooperation rather than resentful compliance, I want to know everything. Your father's journals, his correspondence, his breeding logs, all of it. If I'm risking my life, I deserve to understand the full context." The twins considered this. Giving Joseph unrestricted access was dangerous, but refusing might create exactly the resentful compliance he'd mentioned. "Agreed," Elizabeth said. "But you'll study them here, in this room under our supervision. Nothing leaves this house." Acceptable. What none of them said aloud was that they'd each just made a bargain with someone they didn't fully trust, gambling their futures on a deception so audacious it could only succeed if every element aligned perfectly. Summer months brought oppressive heat, but inside the main house, behind closed shutters, a different kind of pressure built. Elizabeth and Catherine began searching for suitable husbands with cold calculation their father taught them. They needed men meeting the executor's criteria while being vulnerable enough to manipulate. The first candidate was Edmund Varley, a 66-year-old widower whose cotton operation had struggled since his sons moved west. Varley expressed immediate interest when approached about a match with one of the twins. "A beautiful opportunity," he declared during his first visit, watery eyes roaming over Catherine. "Union of two fine properties, continuation of your father's legacy." Catherine smiled and said nothing. After Varley left, she scrubbed her hands raw, as if removing memory of his palm on her arm. "He'll do," Elizabeth said clinically. "He's desperate. He'll agree to any prenuptial terms." "I can't," Catherine whispered. "I can't let him touch me. He won't. That's the point. The marriage is legal fiction. Joseph fathers the child. Varley gets credit. We maintain control. But arranging two such marriages proved complex. The executors, particularly Brentwood, had strong opinions. When Elizabeth suggested a mobile merchant, Brentwood rejected him immediately. "Unsuitable background. Your father intended you to marry into established planter families, not commercial classes." The twins pushed back, but Brentwood held firm, threatening to petition courts to clarify the will's intent. While marriage negotiations dragged on, Joseph immersed himself in Colonel Harrison's papers. What he found exceeded his worst expectations. The colonel's breeding program had operated for 2 decades with systematic brutality. He'd forced specific pairings, sold away children who didn't meet criteria, separated families without regard for human bonds. But the journals also contained evidence of a network. The colonel hadn't worked in isolation. He corresponded with other planters, medical professionals, academics at Southern universities, exchanging research findings and discussing ways to advance theories about racial hierarchies. Joseph began making careful copies using paper Elizabeth provided for household accounts, writing late at night when the twins retired. He developed a system for hiding copied pages inside a hollowed section of his mattress, building a secret archive that would eventually travel north. But he also noticed something the twins didn't mention: patterns of illness among Willow Creek's enslaved population. In late July, 3 women developed symptoms: lesions, fever, progressive weakness. Pritchard reported it casually, suggesting isolation and minimal care. But Joseph had read the colonel's private medical notes and recognized what he was seeing. Syphilis. The colonel had infected multiple women, either deliberately as research or through systematic sexual abuse. Now the disease spread through the quarters, passed between couples, transmitted from mothers to infants. Joseph brought his findings to Elizabeth and Catherine one evening, laying out medical texts with their father's annotations. "Your father gave them syphilis. Either he contracted it and spread it, or he exposed them deliberately. The journals suggest both. And it's killing them." Catherine's face went pale. "How many?" "At least 6 showing symptoms now, but syphilis can remain dormant for years. There's no way to know how many are infected without proper medical examination." "Can it be treated?" Elizabeth asked, standing abruptly. "Mercury treatment sometimes, but they're almost as dangerous as the disease. And expensive. And would require a doctor willing to treat enslaved people properly." "Do it anyway," Elizabeth said without turning around. "Purchase whatever medicines are needed. Have the doctor come out. If he refuses adequate treatment, find someone who will. Miss Elizabeth, the cost, I don't care about the cost. Our father did this. We're not going to let them die from his depravity." It was the first crack in the facade Joseph had seen. The first indication the twins might be motivated by something beyond self-preservation. Dr. Grayfield arrived 2 days later, irritated at being summoned to treat slaves. He examined the sick women with barely concealed disgust, confirmed the diagnosis, and prescribed mercury treatments without guaranteeing results. "Might be more economical to just isolate them and let nature take its course," he said. "Replace them with healthy stock." "We'll take your prescription," Catherine said coldly, "and we'll need you to examine the entire slave population. Everyone. Identify all potential cases." The examinations took place over 3 days in August in a cabin Pritchard cleared. Grayfield worked with mechanical efficiency. The final count was worse than Joseph feared. 11 confirmed cases, another 7 probables. Nearly a third of Willow Creek's enslaved population infected by the Colonel's abuse. Elizabeth and Catherine absorbed this information in silence. Then Elizabeth made a decision that would have shocked their father. "We're treating all of them. Purchase the mercury, the bandages, whatever's needed. Improved rations for the sick, they need strength to survive treatment. Reduced work quotas. And Joseph, you'll oversee the treatments. Keep detailed records of who receives what and their progress." "Miss Elizabeth," Pritchard objected, "this is going to cost thousands and reduce productivity significantly." "Your father would never. Our father did this to them," Catherine interrupted. "We're correcting his damage. The expense is irrelevant." While Joseph grappled with moral complexity, the marriage negotiations reached crisis. In September, Brentwood arrived with a proposal. His nephew, Thomas Brentwood, aged 32, recently returned from Charleston, where his cotton brokerage had failed due to what was delicately termed unfortunate investments. Thomas needed a fresh start. Elizabeth needed a husband the executors would approve. Perfect match. Elizabeth met Thomas twice before reaching her conclusion. He was weak, vain, deeply in debt, which made him perfect. "I'll agree to the match," she told Brentwood, "under specific conditions. A prenuptial contract giving me sole management of Willow Creek. Thomas receives annual income, but no decision-making authority, and the marriage doesn't take place until my sister's match is also arranged. Those terms are highly irregular. Those terms are non-negotiable. Thomas is desperate enough to agree. We both know it." Brentwood sputtered but couldn't argue. Thomas did agree, signing a prenuptial making him essentially a paid figurehead. Catherine's match proved more difficult. Varley had shifted attention to a Montgomery widow. The executors rejected 3 other candidates. Time was running short. They had until August 1848, and it was already October 1847. Then Catherine made a suggestion. "What if I don't marry at all?" Elizabeth looked up from ledgers. "The will requires both of us. The will requires both of us to marry within 18 months. It says nothing about remaining married. I could marry, become pregnant, then accidents happen. Especially to sickly husbands." The room fell silent. "You're suggesting murder," Joseph said quietly. "I'm suggesting we fulfill the letter of Father's will through whatever means necessary," Catherine replied. "He never specified the husbands had to survive." Elizabeth didn't argue, which was answer enough. "If you're planning to kill anyone," Joseph said carefully, "I want no part of it." "You agreed to do what we say," Catherine reminded him. "Then sell me south. I won't be party to murder." The twins exchanged glances. "Catherine's talking theoretically," Elizabeth said. "We're not planning to kill anyone. But she's right that we need to consider all possibilities." Joseph didn't believe her but recognized he had no good options. November brought the first frost and a new development. Elizabeth's wedding to Thomas Brentwood was scheduled for December 20th. But behind wedding preparations, darker plans took shape. Elizabeth and Joseph began their physical relationship in early November. Clinical encounters taking place in the locked study after Catherine retired. Elizabeth approached it with the same cold efficiency she applied to plantation management. Joseph found it profoundly disturbing, not because of the racial taboo, though that danger hovered over everything, but because of the emotional emptiness. The way Elizabeth could separate physical acts from human connection so completely. "My father did this to dozens of women," she said one night afterward, "forced them into exactly this situation. And I swore I'd never be like him. Yet here I am. You're not forcing me." Joseph said, though it wasn't entirely true, "The threat of being sold south hung over everything. Aren't I? You're enslaved. By definition, you can't consent." I tell myself this is different because I'm offering you freedom afterward, because we're partners. But we're not partners. I own you. There's no consent possible in that dynamic. It was the most honest thing she'd said, and it made everything worse because it meant she understood exactly what she was doing and did it anyway. By mid-November, Elizabeth was pregnant. Dr. Grayfield confirmed it. The executors were delighted, one condition satisfied, one more to go. Thomas Brentwood, who'd arrived at Willow Creek 2 weeks earlier, accepted the news with oblivious pleasure of a man who believed his own virility, explained everything. Catherine's situation remained unresolved until early December when she announced, "I found someone acceptable, Mr. Lawrence Kemper, widower, age 49, with a small plantation in Perry County. Moderate means, respectable reputation, no children from his first marriage." Lawrence Kemper arrived on December 10th. A thin, nervous man with graying hair and a persistent cough suggesting consumption. He spoke little, deferred to Catherine constantly, seemed pathetically grateful for her attention. "He's perfect," Catherine told Joseph after Kemper left. "Dying slowly, desperate for companionship, too weak to assert authority. The executors will approve him because he meets their surface criteria, and he'll be dead within a year, leaving me a widow. You're going to let him die of consumption. I'm going to let nature take its course." Is that murder, Joseph? Elizabeth's wedding took place on a cold, clear December day. 35 guests attended, filling Willow Creek's parlor with perfume and wood smoke. Reverend Hayes performed the ceremony with ponderous solemnity. Thomas looked pleased with himself. Elizabeth wore ivory silk that Catherine had sewn. Her expression throughout the ceremony, blank as porcelain. Joseph watched from the back, technically serving as additional household staff. That night, after guests departed and Thomas had drunk himself into a stupor, Elizabeth came to the study where Joseph waited. "It's done," she said simply. "The first condition is satisfied, and Thomas will do as he's told. I made that very clear during our wedding night conversation." Catherine's wedding was scheduled for January 25, 1848. The executors approved Kemper after minimal scrutiny. But in weeks between the two weddings, something shifted at Willow Creek. The house staff began whispering about arguments between the twins. Pritchard reported both women seemed distracted, making contradictory decisions about plantation management. Joseph knew what was happening. The strain of maintaining their deception, combined with Elizabeth's growing self-loathing and Catherine's increasingly cold calculation, was fracturing their previously united front. It came to a head the night before Catherine's wedding. Joseph was in the study working on documentation when he heard screams from upstairs. He rushed up to find Elizabeth and Catherine in Elizabeth's bedroom. Catherine with blood running from her nose. Elizabeth with scratch marks on her face. "She wants to kill him," Elizabeth shouted. "Not just let him die, actually poison him." "He's dying anyway," Catherine screamed back. "Why wait? We dose him with arsenic. He's dead in 6 months. I'm a widow and pregnant and we're done. Because that makes us murderers. Actual deliberate murderers. We're already murderers. Or had you forgotten the coffee you served Father the night he died?" The room went silent. Joseph stared at the twins, understanding flooding through him with sickening clarity. "You killed your father," he said. Elizabeth sank onto the bed, face in her hands. Arsenic mixed with powdered glass in his coffee. Small amounts over 3 weeks made it look like heart failure. Dr. Grayfield never suspected because he wanted to believe it was natural. "We had to," Catherine said, voice defiant. "He was going to sell Joseph and 3 others to a trader from Mississippi. We overheard him, and he was planning to force us into marriages with men he'd selected, men who would have helped him continue his breeding program. We had no choice. There's always a choice," Joseph said quietly. The argument might have continued, but they heard footsteps, Thomas stumbling drunkenly toward his wife's bedroom. The 3 conspirators fell silent. After Thomas gave up and shuffled away, Elizabeth spoke quietly. "We can't do this again, Catherine. If you poison Lawrence, it's over. Someone will notice. Someone will investigate. And all of this, the plantation, our freedom, Joseph's documentation, all of it will be destroyed." Catherine's wedding to Lawrence Kemper took place on January 25th, a smaller affair with only 18 guests. Kemper looked skeletal, his cough worsening. He needed Catherine's support to walk to the parlor where Reverend Hayes waited. When Hayes pronounced them married, Kemper attempted to kiss his bride but was seized by a coughing fit that left blood on his handkerchief. "Consumption's got him good," Dr. Grayfield muttered to Brentwood. "Give him 6 months." Kemper moved into Willow Creek that evening, taking a bedroom far from Catherine's. He seemed pathetically grateful for every small kindness. Catherine and Joseph began their encounters in early February. Unlike Elizabeth's bitter honesty, Catherine treated it as another transaction. By March, Catherine was pregnant. Kemper, confined to his bed by worsening illness, accepted the news with confused pleasure. The executors visited in April to verify both pregnancies. Everything was in order. Both twins married, both pregnant, cotton production maintained. Meanwhile, Joseph spent nights documenting everything. He now had evidence of the Colonel's breeding program, the syphilis epidemic, the poisoning, and the marriage scheme. But he still couldn't figure out how to get documents north without being caught. In May, a traveling preacher named Jacob Sturgis arrived claiming to collect missionary donations. During dinner, Sturgis mentioned spending time in Philadelphia, a known abolitionist center. Joseph made a small hand gesture, a sign used by Underground Railroad operatives. Sturgis paused mid-sentence, eyes flickering to Joseph, then continued without missing a beat. Later, Joseph approached him near the stable. "I have documents, evidence of crimes. It needs to reach Philadelphia." After consideration, Sturgis agreed. Joseph spent 10 days copying his most crucial documentation onto thin paper in microscopic hand. He documented the Colonel's experiments, the forced breeding, the syphilis epidemic, the poisoning, and his own role in the twins' scheme. Summer brought mounting tension. Elizabeth's pregnancy advanced normally, though she grew withdrawn. Thomas took to drinking heavily. Lawrence Kemper lingered in his sick room. On August 21, 1848, Lawrence Kemper died in his sleep from consumption. He was buried 3 days later. Catherine was now a pregnant widow. The will's conditions were fulfilled. In late October, everything nearly unraveled. Thomas, drunk after winning at cards, mentioned that Elizabeth had been pregnant within weeks of their marriage. Word spread through Oakwood County within days. Brentwood arrived demanding explanations. Elizabeth made a calculated confession. "I was violated," she said steadily, 7 months pregnant. "Before our marriage, Thomas and I were intimate. I became pregnant. Rather than cancel the marriage and face ruin, we proceeded. It was wrong. It was sinful, but it doesn't invalidate our father's will." The men exchanged uncomfortable glances. Premarital intimacy was scandalous but not unprecedented. Elizabeth's frank admission made the story believable, a lie protecting the greater deception underneath. "What about your sister? Catherine's situation is entirely proper." Brentwood studied her but had no evidence to disprove her story. "This matter is closed," he declared finally. Elizabeth went into labor on November 18, 1848. The labor lasted 16 hours. At dawn on November 19th, a baby's cry pierced the morning silence. "A girl," the midwife announced, "small but healthy." Elizabeth lay exhausted, her daughter wrapped in blankets beside her. The baby had dark hair and ambiguous features. "She's free," Elizabeth whispered. "That's all that matters." Catherine delivered on December 12th after 14 difficult hours. The umbilical cord wrapped around the baby's neck. The midwife worked with calm efficiency until a weak cry confirmed survival. "Another girl," she said. "She's a fighter." Catherine looked at her daughter, darker than Elizabeth's child. "I'm calling her Ruth after our mother. And mine will be Abigail," Elizabeth said through tears after the grandmother we never knew. The executors visited on December 18th to verify both births and finalize the estate transfer. Brentwood examined the babies clinically, noted their existence, and pronounced the will's conditions fully satisfied. Willow Creek Plantation is hereby transferred to Elizabeth Brentwood and Catherine Kemper. The estate is officially closed. After he left, Elizabeth felt nothing. No triumph, no relief, just exhaustion. They'd won, but the cost had been enormous. Joseph entered carrying Abigail. "She wants her mother." As Elizabeth took her daughter, she made a decision. "We're keeping our promise. Your manumission papers will be filed next week. Funds sufficient to reach Philadelphia and establish yourself there." Joseph had been expecting delays. The directness caught him off guard. "Just like that? We made an agreement. I'm honoring it." "And the documents you sent north?" Elizabeth's eyes narrowed. "I know about those. Pritchard intercepts all correspondence. I know what was in them. Everything about Father's programs. The poisoning, our arrangement." "Then why didn't you?" "Because you were right to document it. Someone needs to tell the truth. Maybe your testimony will reach people who can change things." Catherine appeared with Ruth. "We're not stopping you, but we're asking for 6 months. Stay until June. Help stabilize operations. Then leave with our blessing and enough money to start fresh." It was masterful manipulation, but also honest. 6 months, he agreed. Joseph left Willow Creek on April 22, 1849. He carried his papers in a daguerreotype Elizabeth had commissioned secretly, him holding both girls. The inscription on back read, "Joseph and his daughters, April 1849. May they all find freedom." He reached Mobile and secured passage north. The ship departed April 25th. He never returned to Alabama, but his testimony did. The Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society published their report in July 1849, detailing plantation conditions and naming Colonel Richard Harrison specifically. It caused outrage in northern states and fury in southern ones. In August, Harold Brentwood began asking questions about how Willow Creek information reached Pennsylvania. On September 5th, he arrived with a sheriff and warrant. Marcus was manumitted. Elizabeth replied calmly, "He left with our blessing. Whatever he did after is his business." The search lasted 3 hours. They found nothing. Catherine had burned everything potentially incriminating weeks earlier. But before leaving Alabama, the twins made one final stop. On October 18, 1849, a fire started in the Oakwood County Courthouse basement. The building burned for 8 hours, collapsing before dawn. 3 bodies were found, identified as vagrants seeking shelter. No one looked carefully at why they'd been chained in the basement. The investigation concluded an overturned lamp caused the accident. Most county records from 1847, 1849 were destroyed. Elizabeth and Catherine reached Wisconsin in December 1849. They purchased a small farm outside Madison using false identities, presenting themselves as widowed sisters starting over. Their daughters grew up knowing only that their mothers came from Alabama, had escaped difficult circumstances, and that their father had been a good man who'd made sacrifices. Joseph established himself in Philadelphia as a bookkeeper. He never married, never had other children, never spoke publicly about Alabama. But he continued providing testimony and helped transport escaped slaves until the Civil War began. He kept the daguerreotype hidden, taking it out occasionally to look at his daughters' faces. In 1863, a Union lieutenant discovered a sealed trunk in Willow Creek's ruins containing journals and breeding logs confirming everything in Joseph's report. The documents became part of the case for why slavery needed complete abolition. Colonel Richard Harrison's legacy became exactly what his daughters predicted: exposure, condemnation, evidence of systematic evil. The truth about Elizabeth and Catherine, about Joseph and the children, remained hidden in burned records and carefully constructed lies. The courthouse fire was never solved, the bodies never identified, and the full story of the Alabama twin sisters who shared one male slave remained buried for over a century, until fragments began emerging from sealed documents and private letters that survived the flames.